So thank you, Adnan. That was taking Delhi from pre-op days all the way up to the present, and I think one of the things that becomes very clear in this presentation is that there are many more complicated factors at play than this sort of very simplistic. There was a social movement, op rose up, and op won, right? So if I were to sort of trace sort of two large themes here, right? So one is the election, I believe, 2008, right, where the BSP rises, and where we really start seeing the changing demographic character of Delhi having a political impact. So one of the things that we do know is that post 90s, at least it seems, I'm actually not sure of the data, but I believe migration accelerates into the region. And I think there are people here probably who can tell me whether it does or doesn't. Yeah, it accelerates quite significantly. And we see that the demographic base seems to be having some kind of larger political impact. I think the second very striking result that comes through towards the end of the presentation is this idea that the BJP actually has stayed remarkably constant. What's moving around is everyone else, and we sort of underestimate the extent to which the BJP and Prime Minister Modi have a huge amount of support, even among people who seem like they're supporting AAP. I think that that sort of yields two questions for me, and then I'll sort of open it up. First question I think we've talked about before is how much of the sort of unique character of Delhi explains the extent to which people are able to say, well, I support someone like Kejriwal here, and I support someone like Modi at the center. Is that a kind of politics that we would see in larger states, or is that sort of a city-state phenomenon? Especially because here governance is quite divided between sort of local and center. The second, the second sort of questions that became sort of clear to me looking at the presentation. How much of this is voter, so we have this sort of very large principle in the study of political behavior that ultimately voters tend to be somewhat strategic. You want to vote for one of the top two parties. So how much of this is just sort of, we saw a big spread of parties in 2013, and by the time 2015 comes around, there are a lot of groups that realize Congress is no longer really viable as a top one or two party, and they coordinate on AAP as opposed to BJP. And the reason why I bring this up is that, again, when we look at the MCD elections, it looks like a big spread. But do you believe that that kind of spread will exist when we get to state and national elections in Delhi, or do you think that it will sort of, people will become more strategic and vote for one of these two top parties? And so we might see something very different than what we saw in MCD. So those are sort of two questions that I would sort of start with, and I'm going to open it up after that. So you can take questions, or you can answer as they go.
I'll just answer yours and then probably
okay.
You can. I think that I'll answer your second question first, which is basically, if one were to look at the MCD election, the number of parties is definitely more. But my hunch is that as we'll as we move towards like the upper levels, whether it's Vidhan Sabha or Lok Sabha, I think the number of parties would actually come down, depending upon how, I think a lot would also depend upon how the Congress performs. Not so much, say, like if one were to look at the municipal election, INLD did won a couple of seats, but INLD doesn't stand a chance. So where would the voters go? I mean, they would gravitate towards one of the more viable parties. So I think consolidation would happen, but the open question is whether it would actually happen behind Aam Aadmi Party or the Congress Party.
Do you have a guess?
No. But my guess is if there, see, Congress, I think is still quite viable. I mean, as far as like Delhi is concerned, I don't buy this argument that even if in 2013 you did have a 25% vote share, right? It doesn't mean that vote share just simply vanishes, right? It's right there. I mean, a whole lot of people probably are not voting for the party because they don't think it's viable, probably at the Lok Sabha level. But it gets less complicated when you're looking at municipal elections because the number of voters are less, and so is the size of the ward. So it's, I mean, you are viable. I mean, people would basically exercise that kind of an option. But I think there's still a long way to go. But I think Congress is still very much present.
Okay, so let me.
The first one,
Sorry.
yeah, the unique character of Delhi leads to splitting of votes. I mean, yes, I mean, definitely there's a splitting of votes, and which is happening. But this is not something which is recent. I think what's happening here is that to a large section, I mean, what would be more interesting is to look at how does it pan out when one looks at the constituencies which are in the city region compared to those which are in the periphery and Trans-Yamuna, and especially periphery. The reason being that because the kind of constitutional position which Delhi has, my hunch is that at least in the city region, large number of people are actually aware of that, and which is why that split happens. So there are certain issues on which they believe that the government in Delhi can basically, at least as far as the state legislature is concerned, is in a position to take decisions or make decisions. So they would basically gravitate towards a political party. But whether it's the same party, I mean, in the parliament or not, I think there people are quite clear. But what's interesting is that in most of the election, they go. I mean, at the Lok Sabha level, people end up voting for one political party. So that party wins most of the seats.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, lost the question.
So I'm going to start this way, and we'll take. Why don't we take? Everyone will get a chance, don't worry. So So maybe let's take three at a time, and then you answer, and then I think we'll get. So Manish, please.
So this was the point where you started and then sort of came back to on the whatever the peculiar nature of Delhi and this constitutional arrangement, right? So at this point of time, the Supreme Court is hearing a case regarding the exact extent, what is the nature of that constitutional separation and the extent of the division of powers between the Delhi government and the central government. This was interestingly a question that did not arise in the first 20 years of the amendment being in force, right? It only came in, this tension between the central government and the state government only came in after the AAP second term, right? And therefore the questions arising from it. And it's interesting to see how both the central government and the state government have been trying to play it out in public, right? As each trying to project the other as being the opposition for being in opposition to Delhi's development and stuff. So what I'm going to ask you is slightly speculative. Do you think this whatever comes out of this, right, the final determination on how this division of powers is to be maintained, is going to have an effect on public perception and behavior during the next assembly election, right? Because how people vote also depends on what they think the government can do for them, right? And what Neelan just said about the difference in voting between municipal and the state elections in Delhi itself, right? So do you think that's going to play? How do you think that's going to play out in the next assembly election? I'm assuming we will have a verdict before then.
Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
You have explained very nicely about the entire landscape of the elections. So, are you listening, sir?
No, I'm noting it down.
Yeah. So my question is that as you have said in your talk also that it's not necessary that one party gets a vote, the same person is going to vote next time not for the same party. So that means the maturity of the Delhi voters. And because either of the strength of their, knowledge of the politics or intellectual, because 75% of people are more literate. Now my question is this, that the issues will definitely vary, as my predecessors also said, according to the, three elections we have, the local self-government and the assembly and the general elections. But what about the party structures? When you see, you have not spoken about the party structures when it is disintegrating in itself. So that party is losing vote not because of the voters, it is losing vote because of its internal degeneration or disintegration. Now, that's a very important point which we have to find out. And if any that party starts building up in the integration form, then again you can find out that the Delhi people definitely go for the same party. So this is being repeated. Now, for this has to be covered. The next question is that PM Modi was so popular because for at least 12 years he was a chief minister, and the report by the businessmen and the other people showed that there was no lawlessness problem in Gujarat during his rule. So that was very important, and so because there are hardly 2 crore people in Gujarat, so it's easy to handle. But and his giving very good incentives to the businessmen, and most of the do you think the businessmen make some sort of opinion for the voters to vote, because businessmen are connected right from vendors to MSME? This is the second question.
Third question.
I had it's actually two different questions, so frankly. One is the most recent and one from the past. Most recent one is that I don't know about I've not analyzed the elections here, but my analysis of why psephologists fail, or the biggest problem has been the difficulty of predicting or analyzing turnout. And especially when you get into this disaggregated level of communities or etc., turnout matters a lot. And so my question is, what have you, in your analysis, have you looked at this, and how does that change the picture? I mean, let me just say, most of the well-known elections overseas, that's where the secret lies. The second question is more of a historical question. I have still not been able to figure out why is it and what is the political argument, as opposed to all sorts of speculative or theoretical ones, for Delhi's special status and the changes that have been made over the first between 1951 and 1966. Those are the two questions. Just a third comment. I think about this business, the first question that was raised and what you also concluded about the difference between splitting the vote. The point in Delhi, as opposed to the other places, is, and sometimes is that Delhi you really have local election, which is really totally confounded with state elections. It's really, most of them are local versus the national election. But there is another dimension. For example, one of the seminars in CPR itself some time ago talked about, where they compared the political development 5 different states, that people in the north, especially the UPs, as opposed the ideological dimension of it, even in the state level politics, was much more coincident with the national ones. For example, UP politics, the ideological debate was on a national level, while in the south, in Kerala and in Tamil Nadu, for example, the discussion was really, the ideological debate was at the nationhood, at the state level. So, I mean, that dimension of local versus national in Delhi, of course, misses the middle one. And so it's not at all surprising that there should be a totally split vote.
Okay, so 3 very, very substantial questions. Please
I think to answer your question, I think this happened. I mean, if I were to look at the fact that ever since Aam Aadmi Party came back to power in 2015 with the kind of brute majority they had, I think there was a reworking which happened. Reworking in terms of that instead of focusing upon the state elections immediately, so subsequent state assembly elections in other states, they would basically focus upon Delhi and make Delhi their platform. So consolidate their base. And Arvind Kejriwal also in his subsequent interviews has basically claimed that he was actually forced into contesting the parliamentary elections. He wasn't willing to do that. And so I think the fact that the Aam Aadmi Party won and that Kejriwal was by far the most popular candidate compared to other chief ministerial candidates, basically made them rework their strategy, whereby they believe that Arvind Kejriwal also happens to be as popular as Narendra Modi in Delhi, which wasn't the case, and which is where the second thing was that constitutional position as it exists right now definitely gives center an upper hand, and which came in handy for the center to basically go after Aam Aadmi Party. If we believe that center did have an agenda through the office of the Lieutenant Governor. But here, I think it won't be fair to blame only the center. Aam Aadmi Party also gave center an opportunity, which is basically there were a lot of these grey areas, like say this entire controversy surrounding around the office of prophet, right? Or like this other factor which also played out was basically there were 13 Aam Aadmi Party member MLAs who did have a background, who did have some kind of a criminal background, or like who were accused of corruption in the past. Now the question here is not whether it was true or not. The question, I think what's more important is that helps in this battle of perceptions. Precisely, and I think that's what came in handy when one were to look at the municipal elections for the BJP, and plus it has a committed vote share, and which brings me to, and I'll link it up with the first question which you asked. I think the importance of turnout. I think the turnout is the, and which I think Aam Aadmi Party actually understood much before BJP did in 2014, which is basically this entire focus on youth and first time voters. If they are able to, if you can bring them out in large numbers, then definitely you might have an edge compared to all other traditional claimants. I think in Delhi, if the voter turnout is less, and at least in last few elections, it's the BJP which actually gains if there's splitting of votes, because it has a committed vote base which would actually go ahead and vote for the political party. Because and here I'll just pick up the first question about party as an organization. When we're talking about a party like BJP, I don't think it's a normal party, because what you have is basically BJP plus one, right? So you have BJP and plus you get RSS organization for free. So that cadre, right? So that makes it a very vibrant, potent electoral machine.
I think this is what Prashant had spoken about as well. Yeah. When we discussed it.
Congress doesn't have that, but I think what Congress has, still in place is basically some kind of a patronage network, which I think Aam Aadmi Party is also trying to cultivate, which is how I think one way of looking at all this. I think I might get into a problem, but what is Mohalla Clinic? It's an important initiative, but you are basically trying to carve out a wedge in these existing patronage networks, right? By saying that everything would be channelized through these Mohalla clinics or like other such initiatives, which is commendable. But in the larger scheme of things, you do expect that this would deliver electorally, right?
Would you say the cadre base of the AAP was also significant at what it did in 2015? And as the gentleman just pointed out, which has subsequently seen first decline?
I think what was important for me, like if one were to look at 2013 and 15, I would believe that if 2013 Aam Aadmi Party failed to deliver, then there would be a dip as far as like these first time voters would be concerned. But that doesn't happen in 2014. This younger, AAP was able to basically hold on to its base amongst the first time voters, or like the younger section of the voters, right? It's the others who basically moved away from Aam Aadmi Party in 2014 towards the BJP, but not these first time voters. And I think that's where it was able to, it was basically, I think that's where its contribution lies. Plus, it also realized fairly quite early that it would require volunteers. Where would you get the volunteers from? Where would you get people who would man your polling booths? It would be these first time voters. So they were running campaign all over, especially in educational institutes. Like say IITs did play an important role. I haven't delved deeper into the kind of campaign they conducted. But technologically they were far advanced. And I think it helped that they did have a psephologist in the team. But this question about Prime Minister Modi, I think in Delhi, it wasn't Mr. Modi's track record as the Gujarat Chief Minister which was important. I mean, it was more in terms of him being the Prime Minister and the manner in which he was packaged. That basically was something which delivered for the BJP. Because if this was the case, I mean, if Mr. Modi was so popular, and which he was, and he does remain popular, Mr. Modi actually did not work in 2015. I mean, 2015, bulk of there was a shift away from the BJP towards the Congress, because I think that's where towards the AAP. I mean, I think that's where the Delhi voter is probably the shrewdest one. I mean, they can see through things in terms of that they knew that Mr. Modi won't be the chief minister. You need a chief, and which was the case with substantial number of.
BJP was disintegrating on the question of Kiran Bedi or other, leaders which could not deliver in the campaign in a right perspective. This is my.
I think it's not about Delhi disintegration of Delhi BJP. I mean, BJP as an organization. I mean, if you forget about BJP's trajectory since 2014, BJP as an organization. I mean, 2009 when UPA Congress came back, everybody was saying.
There is a difference between rank and file.
So rank and file, yes. But if one were to look at BJP in Delhi, I mean, you did have factionalism. I mean, where's the fact, but BJP, yes, it did have an advantage. It did acknowledge that Purvanchalis are important, which is why they had to get a BJP president from elsewhere, who's not a local, and precisely, the Purvanchali from Bihar. I think that's significant. So it realizes the importance, as does Aam Aadmi Party.
Okay, so next round of questions, Mary Ellen, and we'll also work our way around.
Thanks. I have one question, I'm not sure, and the rest is more confusion than question. So my first question is, since it's an urban seminar, I am surprised that somehow debates around the city are not very much present in your presentation. So especially if I remember 2008, I remember vaguely reading something about BSP coming, and as far as I understand, it's mostly Western Delhi. So it's very much the rural constituency of Delhi. So Delhi has this thing of having urban and rural within its national territory, so it's not fully urban. So I wonder whether when you did, because statistics, I think it would be nice if we have more of cross tables to understand the vote, and whether you also try to look at the amount of rural or urban economy, and whether that plays a role in understanding some of the voting pattern, and that would bring back maybe the city into understanding the rise of the app. The second thing is, I'm not a political scientist, so I am absolutely amazed somehow that the program of the parties do not fit into your scope of analysis. So either you are trying to tell us, and I'm not sure that's what you're saying, is that come what may, the BJP has a very stronghold in the city, and that's the argument, and therefore the app should be seen as an epiphenomena, and tomorrow it might be the Congress that capture that vote, or is it what you are trying to say? And if this is not what you're saying, how can you somehow anchor such an analysis without thinking of the program, and whether the program of the app was actually a counter program to maybe a vision of the city that the Congress had developed that, I mean, seemed to be actually a city designed by a consultant and not by, I mean, I'm just trying to understand it, because otherwise it feels really sad that we keep voting because we are, I don't know, white, black, green, yellow, and not in relation to programs of parties. So it's more confusion, if you want, than a question.
Next, in the back.
So I just have some statistical questions. The first one is this core BJP vote of like 30-something% that you're showing. Who do you think within the city it comprises? Like, who is this core BJP voter who is voting for the BJP, irrespective of what is going on in terms of class, socio-economic, community, etc., etc. And the second is a clarification. One is that you said that AAP absorbed the BSP vote, but you also said that it did well with the upper class, middle class. I mean, maybe I'm making an assumption that this BSP vote is not upper class, middle class. Can you just clarify that part for me? Thanks.
Can I just answer?
Yeah, go ahead, and then
Yeah.
we'll take the
Because I'll forget otherwise. I'll answer your question first, which is in terms of, uh, I think in 2008, like the reason why BSP with 14% of vote share only managed to win 2 seats was that it did have a base amongst the lower class and lower caste, but it was unable to attract voters belonging to the upper caste and class, and which basically meant that party could not reach plurality at the constituency level, and which is why it failed to basically convert those votes into seats, which AAP managed, and which helps explain what the question which you're asking. I mean, Aam Aadmi Party was not only able to attract this lower class caste vote from the BJP from the BSP, but at the same time, this section which had actually voted for the Congress and which had traditionally been a BJP social base, AAP was basically able to attract them, and which gave them this basically figure of 30% vote share. So it was coming from non-BJP parties, and which consolidates itself in 2015. So 2015 BJP manages. I mean, there's only 1% dip in its vote share, but there's a consolidation of anti-BJP votes which happens, and which is why, I mean, if one were to look at, say, Rekha Divakar's work, I mean, she claims that, I mean, her calculation, as per her calculations, in more than half, 60% of the seats, I mean, Aam Aadmi Party actually crossed the 50% mark. So basically meant that more than a majority of people in a particular constituency has actually voted for the Aam Aadmi Party. Now coming back to the social base of Aam Aadmi Party, now I haven't.
My question is about the BJP. So who is this 30%?
Yeah, I'll come to that. Now here I haven't. I mean, I didn't have the space or the time to actually show it. Now, if I were to look at now, there are these two absolutely brilliant pieces. One by Christophe Jaffalo in this volume on Delhi, which was incidentally published by CSH a couple of years back. It's an excellent paper. The reason being, what he does is that he traces the social profile of Jansang and a BJP voter from 1951 onwards, right up till 1993. And what's important here, from my point of view, that if one were to look at his figures and one were to compare the Lokniti data set from 1993, from 1993 onwards, it's near identical. There's not much of a change. But where it's important is in terms of, and that's the argument which Christoph also makes, that Congress party vote bank, vote social base is near identical to the BJP. But BJP votes are primarily comprises of, I mean, it's traditionally comprised of people who had come from Western Punjab, the trading communities, and so this was its core vote base, and plus a section amongst the peasantry, but most of the peasantry traditionally had supported the Congress party, not the BJP. And so Congress party, and so this has been a consistent support base of the BJP. It's the Congress which is changing, and which also helps explain that Congress was basically vying for as far as trying to, I mean, attract voters from the Purvanchali community, especially those coming from UP and Bihar. The party did basically reach out to them in subsequent elections. So Congress has been to seek out supporters, but having said that, Congress vote base was also near identical, but it did have an edge in terms of trying to reach out to these newer segments which had basically made Delhi home. So that was the only new thing.
I want to take the first question as well, and then I'll put the.
Yeah, the party program. I mean, the thing is, I think it's definitely important. But my problem was that, and I'll be very frank. I mean, it's not that I didn't want to. I mean, party program was unique, but I had while writing the draft, I had a word limit, and I had already exceeded that. So I didn't have the there's another paper which is not by me, but two Polish political scientists who've actually looked at Aam Aadmi Party program, and their argument is, having analyzed Aam Aadmi Party manifesto with the BJP and the Congress, that Aam Aadmi manifesto is basically very close to the one which Congress Party used to have earlier. So that's their argument. I mean, I haven't analyzed the manifesto in a greater detail, but that's their argument.
No, I'm not asking you for the analysis of the program from scientists or whatever. I'm asking you for by the buy-in of the program by the voters, because you're working on voters.
I think programs are important because I haven't. I actually I should have, but I could basically look at the kind of questions which were asked, which were basically related to the programs of both the Congress and the Aam Aadmi Party, but more specifically Aam Aadmi Party. But what I do remember from the survey findings was that this entire question of women's security was certainly more important in 2013. And plus electricity, and which Aam Aadmi Party was able to basically zero in on, and where it had an edge was basically that it was able to reach out to people. So I think in 2013, the fact that they did have this decentralized method of coming out with this 70 constituency specific manifesto went a long way. Or like for that matter, in 2015, they did have a two-pronged approach. So you did have Delhi Dialogue, where like they wanted to take as much questions which were important for the city from people. So the agenda was pretty city centric, and I think that was partly deliberate, because for a whole lot of people, I mean, the Delhi elections had to be about Delhi. So one way of looking at it, I mean, I might be very off the mark, was basically looking at 2015 election as this giant municipal election, issues which basically affect us. It wasn't about this larger scheme of things, you know, what kind of, it wasn't about secularism, it wasn't about other things, it was basically about basic things. I mean, that's where I think the significance of 2015 election lies.
If Niranjan allows me, just about the electricity, it's very clear. I mean, at least among the middle class, the RWAs that had really mobilized against the rise of the price of electricity had really started to veer towards the BJP, which was very smart in organizing a number of demonstration, march and all that. And I think there was a clear movement of RWAs to say that we are not going to be voting BJP, we are going to vote up. But do you think that the fact that Kejriwal, he had already started opposing water privatization in 2009 or 2010, I think, and he had already started to work with RWAs and low-income groups on this issue, so he had actually started to have an image of someone who could mobilize around this kind of basic amenities in the city. Did this play a role or not? Or it's an imagination of an urban infrastructure research?
I think even if it did play a role, it was pretty much centered around the city. Like say, and that's something which AAP realized after 2013 verdict. That's they actually didn't do well in the peripheries, in the rural areas. I mean, to answer your question, I mean, the first part, there's a discrepancy. I mean, in 2013, the rural population largely voted for the BJP, not the Aam Aadmi Party. And Aam Aadmi Party was basically able to attract the urban voters, and which had to do with the kind of issues which they were taking up. Which is where, like in 2015, they actually decided to outsource or like take help of an NGO which was actually working amongst the rural population, because they wanted to know.
UP Bihar migrants are circular migrants, and when they go back, do they take back Delhi's politics to UP?
Thank you. Next question.
It's kind of related, and I'll be very brief. So I've been looking at the Gujarat election, Surat, which is a heavily migrant-dominated belt, and the BJP has been targeting migrants from outside the states because the domestic migrants are mostly patidars. So, and what I've been like coming across is some of the work which has been stating these migrants aren't actually interested in voting in the Gujarat elections itself, and they may be more interested or invested back home where they are coming from. Is that different about Delhi and Gujarat? Like, is Delhi like a mirror to what's going to happen in the future in 20 years around Bangalore or Bombay? About the issue of migrants itself and how they'll be important to urban politics as India urbanizes more.
So, my question was just about, it
seems like the BJP is everyone's second preference.
It looks like the BJP is like people's second preference, even if it's not the first. And is that true across the country? Like, have you looked at CSDS data and stuff, or is that just true in Delhi? I think as far as this question about migrants is concerned, and whether they take Delhi politics back, I think the nature of migration is very. I mean, one thing is that when we're looking at the data, especially more so as far as like the migrants from UP are concerned, we are looking at the larger NCR. That's the problem. A whole lot of them actually stay there, or like they're not very far away, and that's how they make the decisions. Bihar definitely, and which is why I think what's the data actually showed us that amongst the Bihari migrants, BJP actually did not do well in 2013. It's pretty evenly matched between Aam Aadmi Party and the BJP. It's UP which was interesting. Most of them actually voted for the BJP, and so it works both ways. But definitely, I mean, because a large section which had come and settled here basically did all, I mean, as far as like the political makeup and choices were concerned, were to some extent also dictated by politics back home. But I haven't thought about, whether it exists, the other way around also. Now, what was your question? I mean,
So the question was, is the migrant phenomenon that you said in the periphery, which BSP cornered a huge share of the vote, is that a Delhi specific phenomenon, or that's going to happen in Bombay or Surat or other places?
I think it would no longer be Delhi specific, because it would have reflection in other cities also. But I think specificity of Delhi comes from the fact that it's a city state, right? I mean, if one would look at, say, but it's already happening actually. If, like, say, for instance, in Mumbai, right? So the migrant votes are important, and which is why you would have politicians coming from Bihar and Uttar Pradesh and campaigning, or like if you were to look at MIM and the way they went about campaigning, they didn't succeed, but they definitely had. I mean, they had chosen certain localities, and which were basically migrant dominated. So I think that has started happening, but it would also depend upon how many seats are we talking about. And plus, if it is about cities, then it will also depend upon how cash rich those municipal corporations are. So Surat, I mean, I don't think it would matter in the short run, because it will depend upon how many seats are there, from that region, where like the migrants have that kind of an influence. Because once you are sure, migrants can. Huh?
That's a Delhi phenomenon.
That's a Delhi phenomenon. And plus, where migrants become handy is basically in terms of that they provide you with that bridging vote share.
But can I just make one point about your BSP thing?
Yeah.
I don't think that it's necessarily structural in the same way that you are making it out to be. That they suddenly won 14% of the vote. It's probably just that Mayawati won in 2007. So people who might have otherwise not voted for the BSP made a judgment, okay, that this might actually be a winning proposition. And that's probably why, like, it seems like, migrants.
I agree with you. I mean, and which basically gels with his point. I mean, in terms of the fact that a whole lot of people who came from Uttar Pradesh, and because if you look at the percentages, most of the migrants, especially the Purvanchalis, come from Uttar Pradesh, not so much from Bihar. So yes, I mean, a lot of Biharis are around, but UP migrants which have an edge also because of the proximity. So that's definitely the case. I mean, 2007 election did have an effect upon certain pockets in Delhi, but if that was the case,
it's not necessarily through the mechanism of people moving, but just is the BSP winning.
But the problem with that would be if that was the case, that the immediate effect should have been on the 2009 election, in the Lok Sabha election, where like the BSP, I mean, very marginal vote share, and the votes largely were gravitated towards the two top parties, and Congress actually won most of the seats.
just a question, because we usually hear that migrants, it's very difficult to have voting rights, so how much?
No, it's
So
not.
it is not true.
It's a let me, because I had to look at voter lists. You know, actually, one of the things that's amazing is how complete voter. They're too complete, right? There are lots of dead people on voter lists. There are lots of people who should be on voter lists, but actually, you know, if you look at the numbers of people on the voter list, there are probably more people on the voter list over the age of 18 than there are people over the age of 18 in Delhi. But you know, one of the things that's quite spectacular is you know, politicians are very good at finding, you know, free votes and people they need to get to. One of the, I mean, this is an instinct. I have some survey data behind it, but maybe I don't fully buy it enough to write a paper about it. My instinct is that it's only the well-off who can afford to not be on a local voter list. And the reality is most of the world is not that well off, and so you need politicians have an incentive to get you on the voter list, and you have an incentive to be on the voter list. So
Most
yeah.
migrants are therefore on the voter list.
A lot of them are. I mean, so circular migration is tricky for a number of reasons. But you know, even the surveys I've seen from Harsh Manda and so you'd be surprised at the rates of people who are actually on the voter list in those surveys, right? I mean, it's quite interesting actually. I mean, that number should be like 0 or 10, right? It's much higher actually from what I've seen. Yeah.
It's also the easiest ID to get among all the various other IDs that the government.
Yeah. So there's a question.
Yeah, about
BJP's second place.
BJP's. So your question about that BJP is basically the second preference for most of
India.
most of India. No, they do. But the thing is, I haven't analyzed that. But they do. They do that. At least last 3 elections they have. Someone just has to. Last three parliamentary. Yeah.
I mean, my instinct is that it was perhaps not the case not that long ago. You know, because what we think of the BJP is very concentrated vote shares in certain places, the Hindi belt, and you know, winning a large number of seats. But I think what you've seen over the last few years is that in a number of places the BJP is emerging as one of the top two parties, right? And that has something to do with the modern state of politics that we're in. So I think that I'm not sure that that would, let's say, be correct 15 years ago, but I think it may very well be correct now. Yeah.
I'll just go back to the very first table which I had shown where like it's 29%. It's actually 2.9%. Yeah. No, I was just.
So we've reached, just reached 5:15 actually. So I want to thank Adnan for giving a very edifying talk. I think one of the things that was amazing about this talk is it covered a large number of big debates in politics and political science, from Maryland's question about is it preferences or is it social bases, to questions about who is second preference, to questions about when somebody is coming into the city recently, where they have their preferences and where does their ideology lie. So you know, incredibly fruitful talk, and I think you're working at a level at which we don't have a lot of data and a lot of analysis. So very helpful.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to share this, because I'm still working on it. So these comments are most helpful. Thank you so much.